Nobody is attracted to someone who is trying to be attractive, which means you've probably been sabotaging yourself for years. And the worst part is, it looked really hard. Here's what's actually happening in the rooms you walk into. People are making assessments. Fast ones. Not about your shirt or your opener or how well you remembered to make eye contact. They're reading something older than language. Something that runs underneath conscious thought like a current underneath still water. They're reading your nervous system. And your nervous system has been rehearsed, coached, performing. And it shows, not obviously, not in any way you could point to, but in the way a faint smell lingers. Something is slightly off. Something doesn't quite match. That's the problem this book is going to solve. Not by giving you better techniques, not by teaching you a new script. The techniques are part of the problem. Every time you remember to hold eye contact, really hold it, you read that somewhere. You're performing. And humans are extraordinarily good at detecting performance. It triggers a low-level alarm in the brain that most people never consciously identify. They just feel it. Something's off about this person. That feeling costs you more than any conversation you've ever fumbled. What the most magnetic people have isn't technique. It's congruence. Their external behavior matches their internal state, because their internal state is actually worth expressing. They're not broadcasting a signal they constructed. They're broadcasting a signal they became. That's the only place real attraction lives. Not in what you do. In who you are when no one is watching you do anything. This book is about closing the gap. Not through performance, but through transformation. The slow, unglamorous, permanent kind. The kind that rewires what you actually are, rather than coding what you aren't. 13 chapters. Each one a different layer of the same fundamental truth. By the end, the goal isn't to make you more attractive. It's to make attraction inevitable. Before we begin, tell me where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. I read every single one. It's always interesting to see where this reaches. Chapter 1. The Psychology of Silent Magnetism. Your brain decided how it felt about the last person you met before they finished saying hello. Not after the conversation. Not after you'd gathered enough data. Before the sentence was complete. Somewhere in the first few hundred milliseconds of encounter, your brain ran a full background check. Confidence level, emotional stability, social status, threat potential, and filed a report you never consciously read but immediately believed. This is the playing field, and most people don't know they're on it. The self-improvement industry has spent decades focused on the wrong layer. What to say, how to say it, the perfect opener, the follow-up question, the power pose held for exactly 2 minutes before entering the room. All of it operates at the surface level of human interaction, the conscious, verbal, deliberate layer that accounts for, depending on which research you trust, somewhere between 7 and 15% of your actual social impact. 7%. Everything you've rehearsed, everything you've optimized. 7%. The other 93 is happening somewhere your conscious mind can't reach. Micro expressions that flicker across your face in under 1/5 of a second. Breathing patterns that signal whether your nervous system is regulated or running hot. The way your weight shifts when someone challenges you. The fraction of a second before you smile, and whether that fraction is recognition or calculation. You cannot fake these things. You can try. People do try. And the attempt itself becomes the signal. Because inauthenticity has a signature, and the human brain reads it fluently. Here's the dark irony at the center of most social advice. The harder you try to appear attractive, the more clearly you're communicating that you don't actually believe you are. Effort, in the domain of social presence, is readable. It broadcasts need, and need, we'll get to this properly later, is among the least attractive qualities a nervous system can transmit. The people who seem effortlessly magnetic aren't effortless. They've put in enormous effort, but the effort went somewhere different. It went inward, into actual development rather than surface performance, into becoming someone worth being around rather than learning to seem like someone worth being around. There's a difference, and everyone around you can feel it, even if they'd never be able to explain it. The neuroscience here is genuinely worth understanding. Your brain contains a network of mirror neurons, cells that fire both when you perform an action and when you observe someone else performing it. These neurons are why yawning is contagious, why you flinch when someone else gets hurt, why sitting next to a calm person makes you calmer, and sitting next to an anxious person makes your jaw clench without knowing why. Mirror neurons are constantly running emotional simulations of the people around you. They're asking, at a processing speed your conscious mind can't match, what is this person's internal state, and is it safe to be near? When someone has genuine emotional stability, your mirror neurons pick it up and begin to resonate with it. You feel slightly better in their presence, slightly more grounded. You don't know why. You just know you want to stay. When someone is performing stability they don't have, the simulation glitches. Something doesn't add up. The words say confident, but the microsignals say uncertain. Your brain logs the discrepancy without flagging it consciously. It just quietly, persistently, generates a feeling of mild unease. Something's off about this person. That's the mechanism. That's what you're up against. And that's why the only real solution is the one nobody wants to hear. You have to actually become the thing. Not perform it. Become it. Silent attraction is what emerges when the gap closes between who you are and what you project. When there's no gap, there's no performance. When there's no performance, there's no alarm. When there's no alarm, people relax in your presence. And relaxing in someone's presence is the beginning of almost every meaningful connection that has ever existed. Now, and this is important, the qualities that create silent magnetism are not personality traits you were born with or excluded from. This is the part the research is unambiguous about. The calm, grounded, genuinely present people you've encountered in your life didn't arrive that way. They developed it, usually without knowing they were developing it. Usually through the accumulated weight of experience, adversity, self-examination, and, in the best cases, deliberate practice applied to the right things. The right things are what this book is about. They cluster around a few core capacities: emotional regulation, the ability to experience a difficult feeling without becoming it; genuine presence, the ability to be fully where you are instead of partially somewhere else; authentic curiosity, the ability to find other people genuinely interesting rather than performing interest while waiting for your turn; and congruence, the deepening alignment between what you feel and what you express. None of these are techniques. They're the results of inner work, which means they're slow, which means they're permanent, which means they're worth every hour you put into them. Here's what nobody tells you about becoming more attractive through internal development. The process changes what you want. Somewhere along the way, you stop optimizing for how you're perceived and start being genuinely interested in the actual experience of being alive and around other humans. The obsession with attractiveness quietly dissolves, and that's when the magnetism kicks in. The people you find most compelling in your life almost certainly share this quality. They don't seem to be trying to be compelling. They're just present, engaged, comfortable in a way that makes you comfortable. They ask questions that feel real. Their silences don't feel like judgment. Their humor doesn't feel like performance. They're not doing any of that. They're just being someone who has done enough internal work that being someone is enough. That's the destination, not a set of behaviors, a state of being from which attractive behaviors emerge naturally, automatically, without thought. The journey there is the rest of this book, but I want to be honest with you at the start. I've read more psychology research than any reasonable person should, and the finding that still gets me, the one I had to sit with for a while, is this one. Most of what makes people magnetic is not visible to the person who has it. They're not aware of doing anything. They're just living. The awareness is yours. The work is yours. The magnetism, when it comes, will feel like it was always supposed to be there. Because it was. Chapter 2. Presence and the Art of Not Leaking Energy. Most people are somewhere else entirely, and everyone in the room can feel it. You're in the conversation, physically. Your body showed up, performed the commute, selected an appropriate facial expression, but your attention is distributed across 17 different concerns. The thing you said 2 days ago that still bothers you. The thing you need to do tomorrow. The ambient anxiety that doesn't have a specific address, but takes up significant real estate. This is the default human condition. Partial presence. And it costs more than people realize. Not because it's rude, though it is, because it's palpable. Presence, genuine, complete, undivided presence, is so rare in modern life that when someone actually experiences it, it registers as something remarkable, something almost startling. People leave those interactions feeling, without being able to say why, that they just talked to someone worth talking to. You've felt this. Someone gave you their full attention once. Maybe a therapist, maybe a mentor, maybe just someone who happened to be in the right state on the right day. And it felt different, almost intoxicating. You wanted more of it. That's what you're capable of giving people. That's how rare it is. And that's what scattered attention is throwing away. The neuroscience of presence is worth sitting with. When you're genuinely present, nervous system regulated, attention singular, body relaxed but engaged, you create what researchers call psychological safety in the people around you. Their threat detection systems quietly stand down. Their defensiveness drops. They become, often without knowing it, more open, more honest, more themselves. You haven't done anything. You've just been actually there. Contrast this with what scattered attention creates. It's not just neutral. It's actively draining. People who are partially present emit a quality that others unconsciously experience as mild rejection. The message being received, below the level of language, is, "You are not quite worth my full attention." Nobody processes this consciously, but everyone feels it, and the feeling accumulates. So how does presence actually work? And more importantly, how do you build it? 3 components, and they operate together, which means developing one tends to develop the others. The first is emotional regulation. This is the foundation. You cannot be present when your nervous system is dysregulated. Not because you're a bad person, but because a dysregulated nervous system is by definition oriented toward threat, scanning the environment for problems, running simulations of future disasters, replaying past failures for lessons that never quite arrive. This is the opposite of presence. This is your mind somewhere else with an urgent reason to stay there. Emotional regulation is not about eliminating emotion. It's about developing the capacity to experience emotion without being hijacked by it. To feel the anxiety without becoming anxious in your behavior. To notice the frustration without letting it rewrite the conversation. The most practical entry point here is breath. Not as a mystical practice, as a physiological lever. Slow, diaphragmatic breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system directly. It is one of the few ways you can consciously influence your own autonomic state in real time. The people who seem naturally calm in social situations have often, unknowingly, developed breathing patterns that keep them regulated. Slow, deep, steady. This is learnable. It just requires practicing it before you need it, which is the part nobody wants to do. The second component is attention control. Where your attention goes, your presence goes. And attention, it turns out, is trainable. Though modern life is designed by very intelligent people to make it harder to train than it used to be. Single-pointed focus is the goal. When you're in a conversation, the conversation is all there is. Not your phone's gravitational pull. Not your internal monologue preparing a response while the other person is still speaking. The conversation. What's actually happening in it. What the other person is actually communicating, including the things they're not saying. This level of focus is genuinely rare. And when someone experiences it from you, they feel, again, without being able to articulate it, that they matter. That what they're saying is worth something. This feeling creates connection faster than any technique ever developed. The third component is physical awareness. Your body is not neutral. It is either supporting your presence or undermining it, and it is doing this visibly, legibly, in real time. Chronic tension in the shoulders, the jaw, the stomach doesn't stay internal. It expresses outward as an energy that others find uncomfortable without knowing why. It communicates a nervous system that is braced for something, and braced people make other people brace, learning to consciously release unnecessary physical tension while maintaining alertness and engagement. Changes the quality of your presence in ways that no amount of conversational technique can replicate. The body is part of the message. Always. And most people have never thought carefully about what their body is saying. When these three components align, regulated emotion, controlled attention, relaxed but engaged body, something emerges that the research calls grounded presence. It's the quality that makes you feel solid to be around. Stable. Safe in the best sense of that word. People are drawn to stability the way plants orient toward light. Not consciously, just toward it, reliably, because something in them recognizes it as necessary. Here's the uncomfortable truth about presence, and I'll say it plainly because you deserve the actual version. Most people will never develop it. Not because they can't, because they won't slow down enough to notice they're missing it. The world rewards busyness and penalizes stillness, and so the majority of people spend their entire social lives partially elsewhere, wondering why their connections feel thin. You noticed. That's already the beginning. Chapter 3. Strategic silence and the power of deep listening. The most underrated social skill in existence is shutting up at the right moment. Not because silence is inherently powerful, because most people are so terrified of it that they'll say almost anything to fill it. And that terror, and those things they say, are broadcasting exactly the kind of low-grade social anxiety that costs them the very connection they're trying to manufacture with words. Silence scares people. It feels like a verdict, like something went wrong, like you're not entertaining enough, or interesting enough, or present enough to keep the conversational engine running. So people reach for more words, any words, to cover the gap. And the gap, if they'd let it breathe, was the most interesting part. Here's the psychology. Silence creates space, and space is where honesty lives. In rapid-fire conversation, people say practiced things, pre-formed thoughts, familiar opinions, surface-level responses. The good stuff, the real stuff, requires a moment of actual thought. It requires someone to stop performing and start reflecting. When you're comfortable with silence, you give people permission to think. And people who feel permission to think will tell you things they've never said out loud. Not because you asked, but because you left room. That room is rare. Most conversations are two people waiting for their turn, formulating responses while the other person is still speaking, nodding at whatever rhythm seems appropriate, filing the conversation away before it's finished. This is not connection. This is parallel monologue with occasional eye contact. Deep listening is something different. It is an active, engaged, genuinely effortful process that most people have never been taught, and almost no one practices consistently. And it is, research is fairly clear on this, one of the most attractive things you can offer another human being. The mechanism is neurochemical. When someone feels truly heard, not just received but understood, when they can feel that the other person has genuinely tracked what they said and cared about it, the brain releases oxytocin, the same bonding hormone involved in physical touch, in maternal connection, in the deepest forms of trust we're capable of forming. You can trigger this response with listening. Just listening. Done well. This is either a remarkable gift or a significant responsibility, depending on how you hold it. I'd suggest both. Deep listening has 4 layers, and most people operate at the first one if they're lucky. The first layer is content. What is the person actually saying? The literal words, the explicit meaning. Most people manage this, though even here, the tendency to listen for gaps to fill rather than meanings to understand creates significant compression. The second layer is emotion. What is the person feeling as they speak? Underneath the content, always, is an emotional state. Excitement, anxiety, grief, hope, frustration. And that emotional state is usually more important than the words carrying it. Someone describing their work situation isn't just describing logistics. They're communicating how they feel about their life. Are you hearing that part? The third layer is need. What does this person actually need from this conversation? Not what they explicitly asked for, but what would actually help them. Often these are different. People ask for opinions when they need validation. They describe problems when they need to feel less alone in them. They offer information when they need someone to be curious about who they actually are. The person who can hear the underlying need and respond to it, rather than just the surface request, creates a quality of connection that most people have never experienced and immediately want more of. The fourth layer is meaning. Why does this matter to this person? What does it connect to in their larger story? their values, their fears, their sense of who they are and who they want to be. This is the deepest layer of listening, and accessing it requires both patience and genuine curiosity, which we'll address properly in a later chapter. Strategic silence works in service of all four layers. When you stop rushing to respond, you give yourself time to actually process what you've heard. When you're not filling every pause, you're showing the other person that you trust silence, and that trust is contagious. The well-timed pause before you respond communicates something powerful. It says, "What you said was worth thinking about." That alone is increasingly rare. That alone changes how people feel about talking to you. Here's what strategic silence is not. It's not withholding. It's not a manipulation technique. It's not calculated quietness designed to seem mysterious. Any of those would register as the performance it is. Strategic silence is simply what happens when you're genuinely more interested in understanding than in being heard. That shift, from wanting to be heard to wanting to understand, is the whole thing. Everything else follows from it. One practical note on this. The urge to immediately solve someone's problem is strong, particularly if you're someone who cares about being useful. Resist it. Most of the time, people are not asking to be fixed. They are asking to be witnessed. Jumping to solutions, however well-intentioned, communicates that you want the discomfort to end, not that you want to understand their experience. Sitting with someone in difficulty without rushing to resolve it is an act of profound respect. It says, "I trust you to find your way through this, and I'm here while you do." People remember that, not the advice, the presence. The deepest truth about listening is also the most uncomfortable one. Most people are bad at it not because they're selfish, but because they're scared. Scared that silence means failure. Scared that not talking means not mattering. Scared that if they stop performing, the other person will discover there's nothing worth discovering. The people who are genuinely magnetic have found their way through that fear. They've discovered that the quieter they become, the more people lean in, not despite the silence, because of it. Chapter 4. Calm confidence and emotional stability. Calm isn't the absence of chaos. It's what happens when someone has stopped pretending the chaos shouldn't exist. This is the part the confidence industry gets completely wrong. It sells you the idea that confidence is a state of not feeling afraid, not feeling uncertain, not feeling the full voltage of difficult human emotion. That calm people are calm because nothing bothers them. That the goal is to become someone to whom things don't happen. That's not calm. That's numbness. And the difference is immediately legible to anyone who encounters both. Real, calm confidence is something more interesting and considerably more durable. It's the capacity to feel everything, the anxiety, the uncertainty, the sting of judgment, without being controlled by it. It's not the absence of difficult emotion. It's the presence of someone who has made peace with the fact that difficult emotions exist and has stopped treating them as emergencies. This is attractive on a level that bypasses conscious evaluation entirely. From an evolutionary standpoint, and the evolutionary lens is useful here because it explains why something feels magnetic without requiring the person to think about it. Emotional stability signals something ancient and important. It signals that this person can be relied on, that when circumstances deteriorate, when the environment becomes genuinely difficult, they will not collapse or lash out or become someone else entirely. That signal goes deep, deeper than aesthetics, deeper than charm, deeper than any amount of social skill. Because what we're ultimately looking for in the people we allow close to us is safety. Not physical safety, though that too. Emotional safety. The assurance that being near this person won't make things worse. Calm people make things better just by being present. And everyone knows it, even when they can't say why. The neuroscience here is worth a moment. Emotional regulation, the technical term for what we're describing, is primarily a prefrontal cortex function. The prefrontal cortex is the most recently evolved part of the human brain. It handles executive decision-making, impulse control, long-range planning, and the management of emotional responses generated by the older, faster parts of the brain. When you maintain emotional equilibrium under real pressure, you're displaying advanced prefrontal cortex function in real time. This is the neural signature of high cognitive and emotional intelligence, and humans read it. Not consciously, but they read it. This is why calm people seem intelligent even before they say anything interesting. They're not just appearing composed, they're demonstrating physiologically, legibly, that their higher brain is running the show. Now, the question everyone has at this point. How? Emotional regulation is not one skill. It's a cluster of practices that, done consistently, change the actual architecture of how your nervous system responds to difficulty. Let's be specific about what those practices are and why they work. The first is metacognition. Thinking about your thinking. Developing the capacity to observe your own emotional state from a slight distance. Not suppressing it, not drowning in it, but watching it with something approaching scientific curiosity. Oh, I'm triggered. Interesting. What's happening here? This observational distance is not coldness. It's the gap between stimulus and response. And in that gap lives every piece of behavior you actually control. Mindfulness practice builds this capacity more reliably than almost anything else. Not because it makes you calm, it doesn't, not directly, but because it trains the observer. It makes you faster at noticing what's happening in your own nervous system, which means you catch the emotional escalation early when intervention is still easy. By the time most people notice they're reactive, they're already 3 steps into behavior they'll regret. Metacognition catches it at step 1. The second practice is conscious breathing used as a real-time regulation tool, not as preparation, but in the moment. When you notice the early signs of emotional activation, a deliberate shift to slow, deep, diaphragmatic breathing activates the parasympathetic nervous system within seconds. This is not metaphorical. The vagus nerve connects your breath directly to your stress response, and you can use it deliberately. The people who seem naturally calm in pressure situations have often unconsciously developed this habit. They breathe differently. You can learn to breathe differently too. It just requires practicing when nothing is happening, so it's available when everything is. The third practice is stress inoculation. Deliberately, incrementally exposing yourself to manageable difficulty. The logic is identical to physical training. Muscles grow under controlled stress. So does emotional resilience. Every difficult conversation you have instead of avoid. Every public moment of vulnerability. Every situation where you felt the anxiety and acted anyway. Each one builds what researchers call distress tolerance, the capacity to remain functional under pressure. Not comfortable, functional. That's the standard. Not feeling nothing. Doing the right thing anyway. This is also, incidentally, how competence compounds into confidence. Not through affirmation or visualization, through evidence. Your nervous system doesn't respond to what you tell it. It responds to what you've actually done. Every time you've faced something hard and survived it, you've added a data point. Enough data points, and the system stops treating new challenges as catastrophic. It starts treating them as interesting. The fourth practice is self-compassion. And I'll say this plainly, because it's the one most people skip. The way you talk to yourself when things go wrong has a direct effect on your resilience, and therefore on your long-term emotional stability, and therefore on your attractiveness. Harsh self-criticism after mistakes doesn't improve performance. It compounds the original difficulty with a second layer of suffering, narrows thinking, reduces risk-taking, and generates the kind of internal fragility that expresses outward as defensiveness and reactivity. Self-compassion. Treating yourself with the same basic kindness you'd offer a friend in the same situation is not weakness. It's the foundation of the emotional resilience that everyone around you experiences as calm strength. And finally, comfort with uncertainty. This one is the hardest and the most important. Most people spend enormous energy trying to eliminate uncertainty from their experience, demanding guarantees before committing, controlling outcomes that can't be controlled, needing to know how things will turn out before they're willing to invest. This doesn't work. It has never worked. And the chronic attempt generates a low-grade anxiety that never fully resolves because reality is never fully certain. The people who have stopped fighting this, who have made genuine peace with not knowing, carry a quality that is unmistakable and deeply magnetic. They can be trusted with real stakes because their stability doesn't depend on external conditions staying favorable. That's not a performance. That's not a technique. That's someone who has done the work of becoming someone. Chapter 5. Authentic social intelligence. There are always 3 conversations happening at once, and most people are only aware of one. The first conversation is the one you can hear. Words, topics, the explicit surface of what's being exchanged. This is the layer most people treat as the whole thing. They optimize for it. They prepare for it. They replay it afterward, checking whether they said the right things. The second conversation is emotional, what people are actually feeling as they speak. The undercurrent of anxiety or excitement or grief or hope that colors every word without ever being named. This layer runs constantly beneath the first one, shaping it, distorting it, occasionally breaking through it in ways that surprise even the person speaking. The third conversation is relational, the invisible negotiation about power, positioning, and connection that every social interaction involves. Who defers to whom? Who's being evaluated? Who wants something? Who's protecting something? This conversation has no words at all. It's conducted entirely in microsignals, timing, posture, eye contact, the specific quality of someone's attention. People with genuine social intelligence perceive all 3 simultaneously, not through effort, through developed sensitivity, the kind that comes from years of paying careful attention to what's actually happening in rooms, rather than just what's being said in them. Most people are stuck in conversation 1. They're responding to content while missing the emotional subtext that gives content its actual meaning. They're answering the question that was asked while missing the need that motivated asking it. They're in the interaction, but not quite of it. Present enough to participate, not present enough to actually understand what's happening. This is not stupidity. It's untrained attention. and it's almost universal. Social intelligence begins with a simple but demanding reorientation. You stop being the protagonist of every interaction and start being the most accurate observer in the room. Your concerns, your performance, your impression management, these move to the background. What moves to the foreground is everything else, everyone else. The first skill this requires is reading emotional states in real time. Emotions express through the body before they reach language, often before the person feeling them has consciously registered them. A micro-expression, an involuntary facial movement lasting less than a quarter of a second, will betray genuine feeling even when everything else is carefully managed. Posture changes, breathing shifts, eye contact patterns tell stories the words are contradicting. Learning to read these signals is partially innate and substantially learnable. It requires slowing down your processing enough to actually notice them, which means, again, that your own anxiety has to be regulated first. A nervous system running hot doesn't have the available attention to read subtle signals. It's too busy scanning for threats. This is why the internal work of the previous chapters isn't separate from social intelligence. It's the prerequisite for it. You cannot read a room accurately when you're primarily reading your own fear. The second skill is understanding your own emotional impact on others. Most people are largely unconscious of the effect they have in a room. They don't notice that their anxiety makes others anxious, that their intensity narrows rather than opens conversation, that their need for approval creates exactly the dynamic, evaluative, careful, performed, that they were hoping to escape. Developing this awareness requires a specific kind of honesty. You have to be willing to consider that some of the social outcomes you've attributed to other people's behavior were actually responses to your own. This is uncomfortable. It is also enormously useful. When you understand your emotional impact, you gain access to something powerful. The ability to adjust not what you say, but what you're generating, the quality of energy and attention you're bringing into the space. This adjustment changes the room, not through technique, through actually shifting your internal state. The third skill is cognitive empathy, and it's worth distinguishing this carefully from emotional empathy because the distinction matters. Emotional empathy is feeling what others feel. It's the involuntary resonance. You see someone in pain, and something in you responds to it. This is valuable and deeply human, but it has a limitation. It can overwhelm. It can blur the boundary between your experience and theirs until you lose your own center. Cognitive empathy is understanding how others think and feel without necessarily feeling it yourself. It's the ability to build an accurate model of another person's perspective, their concerns, their motivations, what this situation looks like from inside their experience, while retaining your own distinct vantage point. This is the form of empathy that's most useful in complex social situations. Negotiations, conflict resolution, leadership. Any situation where you need to understand and respond to another person's reality while remaining grounded enough to make clear decisions. It's what allows you to say, genuinely and accurately, "I understand why you see it that way," even when you see it differently. And that sentence, when it's real, dissolves more interpersonal tension than almost anything else in the human communication toolkit. The fourth skill is adaptability, and this is where social intelligence becomes visible to everyone watching. Different people need different things from interaction. Some need directness, Some need gentleness. Some process quickly and want rapid exchange. Others need time and silence and space to formulate. Some communicate primarily through humor, others through careful precision. Socially intelligent people move between these modes fluidly, not because they're chameleons, not because they have no stable self, but because they understand that communication is for the other person, not just for themselves. The goal of talking is understanding, and understanding requires speaking in a language the other person can actually receive. This adaptability is not performance, it's respect. The recognition that your preferred communication style is not the only valid one, and that genuine connection sometimes requires you to step outside it. Here's the uncomfortable truth about social intelligence, and it needs to land hard. Most people's social difficulties are not caused by what others do to them. They're caused by their own emotional reactions, the defensiveness, the need for approval, the anxiety about judgment, being projected outward as social problems. The person who makes you feel inadequate in conversation is usually not trying to make you feel inadequate. They're just living their life with their own preoccupations. But your nervous system, already primed to scan for threat, reads their distraction as dismissal, and their confidence as judgment, and their directness as attack. And then you respond to the threat that isn't there, which creates a dynamic that actually is a problem, which confirms the original fear. This loop is running in the background of more social interactions than you'd want to know about. Breaking it requires the same thing everything in this book keeps requiring: regulated nervous system, honest self-observation, genuine curiosity about what's actually happening, rather than what your fear is telling you is happening. Social intelligence is not a separate skill layered on top of emotional development. It is emotional development, applied outward, into the complex and unpredictable territory of other human beings. When it's genuine, people feel it. They feel seen. They feel understood. They feel that you've actually entered their experience rather than waiting outside it with prepared remarks. That feeling of being genuinely met is what creates the kind of attraction that doesn't fade after the conversation ends. It's what makes someone think about you afterward, not because you were impressive, because you were actually there. The body speaks first. Your posture made a first impression 4 seconds before your face did. Not 4 minutes. 4 seconds. By the time you've crossed a room, before a single word, before a handshake or a smile or any deliberate social act, the people in that room have already run an assessment. They don't know they've done it. They couldn't tell you what they concluded. But it's done. Filed. Quietly influencing everything that follows. The body is not a vehicle for the mind. It's not a container you inhabit, while the real you operates somewhere inside. The body is part of the communication system, a central part, arguably the loudest part, broadcasting constantly whether you've given it anything useful to say or not. Most people have given it nothing useful to say. They've spent years thinking carefully about their words, and almost no time thinking about what their body is doing with those words. The result is a chronic mismatch. Thoughtful content delivered by a physical presence that communicates something else entirely. The science of embodied cognition changed how psychologists understand the relationship between body and mind, and it changed it in a direction most people find counterintuitive. The assumption is that your internal state generates your physical expression, that you feel confident, so you stand tall, that you feel anxious, so you contract. This is true, but the relationship runs the other direction too. Adopt a particular posture, and you begin to feel what that posture is associated with. Hold an open, upright, expansive position, and your nervous system shifts. Cortisol drops. Testosterone rises. The physiological signature of confidence starts to emerge, not because you thought your way there, but because you put your body there. This is not mysticism. It's bidirectional neurological feedback. And it means that working on physical presence isn't just about how you appear to others. It's about who you actually become when you occupy your body differently. The foundation of attractive physical presence is what movement disciplines, martial arts, dance, somatic therapy, call centering. This is the practice of maintaining awareness of your physical center of gravity, located roughly 2 inches below your navel, and moving from that stable base rather than from the tension in your shoulders or the anxiety in your chest. When you move from center, something changes. Movements become more fluid. Stillness becomes more grounded. The quality of physical presence shifts from scattered to solid in a way others can feel before they can see. Most people move from wherever their tension is currently living. For a lot of people, that's the upper body. Shoulders pulled forward, chest compressed, neck holding the weight of everything currently being worried about. This generates a quality of physical presence that communicates chronic low-grade stress. Not dramatically, not in any way you could point to, but it's there, and people feel it. Learning to drop that tension, consciously, regularly, until it becomes the default, changes not just how you look, but what you generate in the people around you. Eye contact deserves its own careful attention, because it is the most powerful element of physical presence and the most consistently misunderstood. The advice usually given is to hold more of it. Make strong eye contact. Don't look away. This advice produces, in practice, a significant number of people who now stare at others with an intensity that reads somewhere between unsettling and predatory. The goal is not more eye contact. The goal is genuine eye contact. Contact that communicates presence and interest, rather than performance and effort. Genuine eye contact has a rhythm. It makes contact while listening, fully, without the slight unfocusing that happens when you're formulating your response, rather than receiving what's being said. It breaks naturally when speaking or thinking, because looking away while you're genuinely searching for words is honest. And honesty reads better than maintained contact that's being held on principle. The quality of the contact matters more than the duration. Soft eye contact, present, warm, actually seeing the person, is more powerful than hard eye contact held as a dominant signal. People feel the difference. Soft contact makes them feel seen. Hard contact makes them feel evaluated. Only one of those is attractive. The way you use space, physical space, in a room, at a table, in proximity to others, also communicates constantly. Confident people occupy appropriate space naturally, not aggressively. That reads as insecurity performing as confidence, which is immediately recognizable, but without the contracted smallness that signals anxiety or the need for permission to exist. Taking up appropriate space means sitting without making yourself smaller than necessary. Standing without weight, shifting restlessly from foot to foot. Moving without the apologetic quality that says, "I'm not sure I should be here." It means inhabiting the room you're in as though you belong in it, which, to be clear, you do. Walking patterns reveal more than most people realize. The pace, the steadiness, the quality of the stride, these communicate your relationship to your own sense of purpose and belonging. Rushed walking signals anxiety or the performance of importance. Uncertain walking signals exactly what it sounds like. The walk that registers as attractive moves with purpose at a pace that isn't hurried, as though you know where you're going and have decided that getting there is sufficient reason to be moving. Voice sits at the intersection of body and communication, which is why it belongs in this chapter. The voice is a physical instrument, its qualities determined by posture, breath, tension, and the physiological state of the person producing it. You cannot think your way to a more resonant voice. You can relax and breathe your way there. The vocal qualities most associated with attractiveness are not loud or performatively deep. They're grounded, steady, unhurried. The voice of someone speaking from a relaxed body has a resonance that a tense body physically cannot produce. You've heard the difference. The person whose voice seems to come from somewhere solid versus the person whose voice sits up in their chest or throat, slightly thin, slightly pressed. The difference is the body, not the voice. Pace of speech matters equally. Too fast communicates anxiety, the need to get everything out before you're interrupted or dismissed. Too slow becomes its own kind of performance. The pace that reads as confident is moderate and variable, speeding slightly with enthusiasm, slowing slightly for emphasis, pausing when a pause is warranted. The pause is worth emphasizing specifically. Most people treat pauses as failures. The person who can pause deliberately, who can finish a sentence, let it land, and remain comfortable in the moment before continuing, is communicating something powerful with that silence. That they are not afraid of it, that they trust the room, that what they said was worth the space to settle. Here is the thing about physical presence that everything else in this chapter is building toward. You cannot fake it at the level that matters. You can hold a power pose. You can remember to make eye contact. You can slow your speech down deliberately. And all of these conscious adjustments will help, marginally, temporarily. But the physical presence that genuinely attracts people is the physical presence of someone whose internal state is actually worth expressing. The calm, grounded, open body language that others find magnetic is the natural expression of a calm, grounded, open internal state, which is why the body chapter comes after the chapters on emotional regulation, on presence, on the inner work. Not as an afterthought, as the visible result. When you do the internal work, the body follows. And when the body is congruent with the internal state, when what you're expressing is what you're actually feeling, the whole system becomes legible as something real. People stop sensing performance. They start sensing a person. That's the shift everything is pointing toward. Chapter 7. Building confidence from the inside out. Confidence built on affirmations is a house built on compliments. Pretty until the weather changes. And the weather always changes. This is the fundamental design flaw in almost every confidence-building system sold to people who need it. They're built on the wrong foundation. Positive self-talk, visualization exercises, the relentless internal campaign to feel better about yourself through the sheer force of telling yourself you're great. These strategies share a critical weakness. They're disconnected from reality. Your nervous system is not stupid. It knows the difference between what you tell it and what you've actually done. It knows the difference between the affirmation and the evidence. And when evidence is thin, when the confidence has no structural support beneath it, the whole thing collapses the moment something real pushes back. Which is exactly when you needed it most. Real confidence, the durable kind. The kind that doesn't require favorable conditions to remain operational. is built on something your nervous system cannot argue with: competence, actual capability. The accumulated, unmistakable evidence that you can do hard things, learn from difficult outcomes, and remain functional when circumstances resist you. This is slow to build. That's the honest part. There is no shortcut to the kind of confidence that comes from having actually done things. But there is a path, and it's worth understanding clearly because most people are not on it. The psychology here centers on a distinction between two concepts that are often conflated: self-esteem and self-efficacy. Self-esteem is how you feel about yourself in general. It's the global evaluation: am I worthwhile? Am I good enough? Do I deserve good things? Self-esteem is valuable, but it's also fragile because it's largely based on interpretation. The same outcome can raise or lower your self-esteem depending on how you frame it, what you compare it to, and how your inner critic is currently calibrated. Self-efficacy is something more specific and considerably more durable. It's the domain-specific belief that you can handle particular kinds of challenges. Not "I am a good person," but "I have handled situations like this before and found a way through." Not general self-approval, but specific, evidence-based confidence in your capacity to function in particular contexts. Self-efficacy builds through experience, through the accumulation of what psychologists call mastery experiences, moments where you faced something genuinely difficult and handled it. Not perfectly, functionally. The threshold is not excellence. It's survival with learning. Every hard conversation you've had instead of avoided. Every skill you've developed past the embarrassing early phase. Every time you've been wrong and acknowledged it and kept going. Every failure you've extracted something useful from. These are the bricks. Confidence is the building they make. This is why competence development is not optional for people who want genuine confidence. Not professional competence only. Any genuine competence. Physical, creative, emotional, intellectual. The domain matters less than the process, which is always the same. Identify a meaningful challenge. Attempt it inadequately. Learn from the inadequacy. Attempt again. Repeat until capable. This process, applied consistently across different areas of life, generates a quality of self-assurance that is immediately legible to others because it's real. It's not being projected, it's being read. The growth mindset research, Carol Dweck's work, which has been replicated extensively, makes a crucial contribution here. People with what she calls a fixed mindset believe their qualities are essentially static. Intelligence, talent, social ability. You either have it or you don't. Failure for these people is evidence of inadequacy. It confirms the thing they feared was true about themselves. People with a growth mindset understand their qualities as developable. Failure for them is information. A calibration. Evidence about where current capability ends and where effort needs to go. This reframing of failure changes everything about the risk calculus. If failure is verdict, you avoid anything that might produce it. If failure is data, you seek the challenges most likely to generate it, because that's where the growth is. Confidence compounds in growth mindset people. Every setback teaches something. Every challenge stretched past produces evidence of capability. The system is self-reinforcing in the right direction. For fixed mindset people, the system runs in reverse. Every difficulty is a threat. Every failure confirms the fear. The natural response is to narrow the range of attempts, to stop taking risks, to stick to the territory where current competence is guaranteed. which means the evidence base stops growing, which means confidence has nothing to build on, which means the original insecurity deepens. This is the loop. And getting out of it requires choosing a challenge deliberately, something beyond your current demonstrated capability, with genuine risk of failure pursued anyway, not recklessly, progressively. What psychologists call the zone of proximal development, challenges difficult enough to produce growth, manageable enough to survive without trauma. The edge of what you can do, consistently sought, consistently worked at. Self-knowledge is the other non-negotiable component of genuine confidence, and it's the one most commonly ignored. Knowing yourself, actually accurately, without either harsh self-criticism or self-protective delusion, is the foundation of operating in the world without constant anxiety. When you know your genuine capabilities, you don't have to perform having more. When you know your real limitations, you don't have to spend energy hiding them. This honesty is both more relaxing and more effective than the alternative. Confident people are usually realistic about their limitations, not defeated by them, realistic about them. They can say, "I don't know," without it costing them anything. They can ask for help without experiencing it as exposure. They can acknowledge mistakes without the acknowledgement threatening their entire self-concept. This groundedness in honest self-assessment is, ironically, one of the most attractive expressions of confidence available. Because it's the behavior of someone who doesn't need to be everything to remain secure in being something. Here is the truth about confidence that the industry doesn't want to tell you because it takes too long to sell. There is no way to feel genuinely confident before you have genuine reason to feel it. The feeling follows the evidence. Always. The path is not to feel confident first, and then do things. The path is to do things, imperfectly, repeatedly, with attention to what you're learning, and discover that confidence is what grows in the space left by fear you walked through. I have watched people pursue confidence for years through every shortcut available. The affirmations, the visualization, the YouTube motivational content consumed at 2 a.m, and the ones who eventually found it, really found it, the durable kind, found it the same way. They did something hard, then something harder, then something harder than that. And one day, they noticed the voice saying, "You can't handle this," had gotten quieter. Not gone. Quieter. Manageable. That's confidence. Not the absence of doubt. The presence of evidence substantial enough to act in spite of it. Chapter 8. The magnetism of genuine curiosity. The most attractive thing you can do for another person is make them feel like the most interesting person in the room. And mean it. That last part is doing all the work, because the technique of feigning interest is not new. People have been performing curiosity as a social strategy since the first self-improvement pamphlet was printed. Ask questions. Nod at appropriate intervals. Repeat their name back to them. The mechanics are well documented and widely practiced, and almost completely ineffective at producing the thing they're supposedly designed to produce, which is genuine connection. People can feel the difference between someone who is asking questions because they read that asking questions is attractive, and someone who is asking questions because they actually want to know. The difference is in the quality of attention behind the question. Performed curiosity has a slightly hollow quality. The question arrives, but nothing is really waiting for the answer. Genuine curiosity leans forward. It listens differently. It follows the thread wherever it goes, rather than steering back to the script. Here's the psychological reality underneath this. Most people go through social interactions in a fundamentally self-referential mode. They're thinking about how they're coming across, whether they're being interesting enough, what they should say next, how the other person is evaluating them. The majority of their cognitive and emotional bandwidth is consumed by this internal monitoring loop, which means very little is left for actually being curious about another human being. The result is a world full of people who are technically interacting but not really connecting. Ships with very sophisticated radar systems, all of them scanning for the same thing, evidence that they're okay, that they're liked, that they're doing this right, and none of them actually seeing each other. Genuine curiosity requires exiting this loop. It requires shifting the central question from "how am I doing?" to "who is this person, actually?" This shift sounds simple and is genuinely difficult, because the self-monitoring loop is not vanity, it's anxiety. It's the nervous system trying to manage threat. And telling an anxious nervous system to stop monitoring and start exploring is like telling someone who's bracing for impact to relax their shoulders. Technically correct. Easier after you've done the internal work that makes the anxiety quieter. Which is, again, why this chapter comes after the ones that came before it. When the anxiety is regulated, when you're not spending your social presence trying to survive it, something remarkable becomes available. Other people. The actual complexity and strangeness and depth of other human beings. Which turns out to be, when you can access it, genuinely fascinating. Every person you encounter has built an entire inner world. They have a specific relationship with failure that shaped them in ways they've partially mapped and partially haven't. They have beliefs about themselves that were installed by experiences they may not even clearly remember. They have fears that don't make complete sense even to them, and passions that light something up that normal conversation never reaches, and a private narrative about their life that is nothing like the version they present in public. None of this is visible on the surface. All of it is accessible to someone who is genuinely curious enough to go looking. The quality of your questions determines the depth of what you find. Surface-level curiosity generates surface-level information. What do you do? Where are you from? How long have you been here? These questions are not wrong. They're entry points. But most people treat them as the conversation rather than the beginning of one. They collect the answers and move on to the next question in the sequence, mistaking information gathering for actual interest. Genuine curiosity follows threads. It hears something in an answer, a slight hesitation, an unexpected word choice, a flash of real feeling underneath the practiced response. And it goes there. What drew you to that? What's the hardest part? How did that change how you see things? These follow-up questions communicate something the original questions don't. They communicate that you were actually listening, that what they said landed somewhere and produced something. A real response in a real person who was genuinely tracking. This is rare enough that when people experience it, they often describe the conversation afterward as one of the best they've had in a long time. They're not describing what you said. They're describing what you made possible. The second dimension of genuine curiosity is interest in inner experience, not just outer circumstances. Most conversation stays in the territory of events and facts. What happened, what you did, what the situation was. This is the easy layer, the more interesting layer, and the one that creates actual connection, is how people make sense of their experience. What they've concluded from it, what it means to them, what it changed. This is where people's actual character lives, not in the events of their lives, but in their relationship to those events. Two people can go through identical experiences and come out with completely different orientations to the world. The curiosity that finds that interesting, that wants to understand not just what happened, but how someone metabolized it, is the curiosity that creates real intimacy. Accessing this layer requires both genuine interest and a quality of non-judgment that allows people to be honest. People don't share their real relationship to their experiences with people who feel evaluative. They share it with people who feel safe, who seem interested in understanding rather than assessing, who won't use what they learn to diminish or categorize. Creating that safety is partly about the questions you ask. It's more about the quality of your reception when the answers come. Whether you respond with curiosity or judgment, whether you seem interested or surprised in the wrong way, whether the person feels in the moment of sharing something real that they just made a mistake. The third dimension of genuine curiosity is what might be called beginner's mind. The Zen concept of encountering things without predetermined conclusions. Most people approach other people with significant amounts of prior conclusion. They've categorized the person by demographic, by first impression, by how they're dressed, or how they speak, or what they do for work. And these categories, while sometimes useful, are always reductive. They narrow the person down to a type. And types are not interesting. People are interesting. Beginner's mind means holding the categories loosely, remaining genuinely open to being surprised, allowing the person in front of you to be more complex, more contradictory, more interesting than your initial read suggested. This openness, the willingness to be wrong about who someone is itself a form of respect. It says, "You are more than I can predict." People can feel when they're being encountered this way. It's the opposite of how most social interaction feels, which is categorizing, efficient, slightly impersonal. Being genuinely encountered as a complex individual rather than a social type is an experience people seek out, and they seek it in the direction of the person who provided it. Now, the honest complexity here. Genuine curiosity cannot be manufactured for people you genuinely find uninteresting. You cannot will yourself into fascination, and faking it produces the hollow quality we started with, which is worse than not trying. But here's what's also true. Most people underestimate how interesting other people are because they've never gone deep enough to find out. The surface of most people is, admittedly, not that remarkable. The surface is constructed to be acceptable rather than interesting. It's the public-facing version, edited for safety and palatability. Below that is almost always something more. Developing genuine curiosity is partly a skill and partly a decision. The decision to assume, in advance of evidence, that the person in front of you has something interesting to offer if you go looking for it. This assumption, held consistently and backed by real questions and real attention, becomes self-fulfilling. You find what you go looking for, and what you find, increasingly, is that humans are strange and complicated and much more worth talking to than their surfaces suggest. One more thing. Curiosity about others has a side effect that nobody advertises but everyone who develops it notices. It makes your own life considerably more interesting. Not because of what you learn, though that's real, but because genuine curiosity is an orientation toward the world that finds more to engage with everywhere it looks. Curious people are not bored. They are not boring. They bring something to every interaction. Not performance, not rehearsed material, but live engagement with whatever is actually in front of them. This is magnetic in the most literal sense. Not because you're trying to attract, because you're genuinely attracted to ideas, to people, to the strange ongoing puzzle of human experience. And that quality, in a world full of people performing interest they don't feel, is something people move toward without quite knowing why. Chapter 9. Nonverbal Communication and Subtle Influence. You are broadcasting on 17 frequencies simultaneously and consciously, controlling maybe 2 of them. The other 15 are running on their own, transmitting information about your emotional state, your confidence level, your relationship to the person you're talking to, and whether your internal experience matches what your words are claiming. All of this is being received by the people around you faster than conscious thought, processed by neural systems that evolved specifically to read exactly this kind of information. You do not get to opt out of this broadcast. You are always transmitting. The only question is what? This is the part of the conversation about nonverbal communication where most people start thinking about what to do differently, what adjustments to make, which signals to deliberately send. And this instinct, while understandable, is precisely where most nonverbal communication advice goes wrong. Because the problem with deliberately managing your nonverbal signals is the same problem we've been circling throughout this entire book. It's performance. And performance has a signature, a slight excess of deliberateness, a quality of behavior that is slightly too considered, too held, too managed to read as natural. Human brains are calibrated with remarkable precision to detect this signature. When someone is consciously managing their eye contact, you can feel something slightly off about the eye contact. When someone has adopted a deliberately open posture, there's a quality of effort in it that a truly relaxed, open posture doesn't have. When someone is smiling with intention rather than feeling, the muscles around their eyes don't engage the same way. The Duchenne marker, the involuntary crinkling at the corners of the eyes, cannot be produced on demand. It requires actual positive emotion. You cannot fake the markers of genuine internal states. You can produce approximate versions of them. But the approximations register as approximations, even when the observer can't articulate what's wrong. This is why the foundation of powerful nonverbal communication is not technique, it's congruence. The alignment between your actual internal state and what your body is expressing. When these match, nonverbal communication becomes effortless and powerful. When they don't, every deliberate adjustment you make is working against the current of what you're actually transmitting. Which means the work, again, is internal. Develop the states worth expressing, and the expression takes care of itself. That said, understanding the channels you're broadcasting on is genuinely useful. Not to manage them artificially, but to understand what your current default settings are and where they might be undermining you. Facial expression is the highest bandwidth channel of nonverbal communication. The human face is capable of producing thousands of distinct configurations, and we read them with astonishing speed and accuracy. More importantly, we read micro-expressions, involuntary facial movements lasting as little as 1/15 of a second, that bypass conscious control and reveal genuine emotional states even when everything else is carefully managed. What this means practically is that your face is always telling the truth, even when your words aren't. Not dramatically, not in ways that make you a bad person, but in the small, constant, unconscious ways that people around you are registering without knowing they're registering them. The most important facial channel for attraction is genuine positive expression. And the emphasis on genuine is doing serious work. A genuine smile engages the entire face. The zygomatic major pulls the corners of the mouth up, and simultaneously, the orbicularis oculi, the muscle around the eye, contracts, producing the characteristic crinkling and slight narrowing that distinguishes authentic from performed positive expression. People don't consciously think, "That's a Duchenne smile, I trust this person now." They just feel, without analysis, a warmth toward the person. Or they don't feel it when the smile is performed. The discrimination is automatic. The effect is real. The practical implication is not to practice smiling. It's to actually feel the things that produce genuine expression, which requires being actually present, actually interested, actually experiencing something in the interaction, rather than monitoring it from the outside. Vocal tonality is the second major channel, and it carries information that most people dramatically underestimate. The words you speak convey explicit meaning. The voice that delivers them conveys emotional state, confidence, social positioning, and the degree to which you actually believe what you're saying. These two signals operate independently, and people integrate them instantaneously, which is why you can tell, within a few sentences, whether someone is confident in what they're saying or performing confidence in it. Confident vocal delivery is characterized less by specific acoustic features and more by the absence of anxiety markers. The voice doesn't rush. It doesn't thin or tighten under pressure. It doesn't rise at the ends of statements in the pattern that turns assertions into questions. The unconscious vocal request for reassurance that betrays uncertainty. Grounded vocal presence means speaking from a physically relaxed place. The resonance of a relaxed, open chest is physically different from the sound produced by a constricted, anxious one. You've heard the difference. The person whose voice seems to come from somewhere deep and settled versus the person whose voice sits up in their throat, slightly effortful. This is not about manufacturing a deeper voice. It's about releasing the tension that's compressing the voice you already have. Posture and movement we've addressed in the previous chapter, but in the context of nonverbal communication as influence, one element deserves emphasis. Mirroring. When people feel genuine rapport, when they're actually connecting rather than performing connection, their bodies synchronize. Postures align. Gesture rhythms match. Breathing patterns begin to resemble each other. This synchronization happens automatically as a byproduct of genuine attunement. It's the body's expression of genuine resonance. The popular advice to deliberately mirror others, to consciously adopt their postures and gestures to create artificial rapport, can work marginally in the short term. But it has the same limitation as all performed nonverbal behavior. The slight excess of deliberateness is detectable, and when people detect that their emotional state is being managed rather than genuinely shared, the rapport evaporates faster than it formed. Natural mirroring, which emerges from actual presence and genuine interest, produces something different. It creates a quality of resonance that both people feel, the sense of being on the same wavelength, which is not a metaphor but a physiological reality. Energy and presence are the most diffuse and most powerful channel in the nonverbal broadcast. Your overall energetic state, the combination of emotional regulation, attentional quality, physical openness, and genuine engagement, creates something that doesn't fit neatly into any single category, but is immediately, unmistakably palpable to everyone in your vicinity. You've walked into rooms and felt, without data, that something was off. You've sat with people and felt, without evidence, that they were genuinely glad you were there. These weren't impressions you constructed from explicit signals. They were direct transmissions, received below the threshold of conscious analysis. Your energy is transmitting the same way, constantly. And the transmission is not primarily a function of what you do. It's a function of what you are. In this moment, in this interaction, in your relationship to yourself and others right now. The influence that genuinely magnetic people exert through nonverbal channels is not manufactured. It's the influence of someone whose presence simply feels good to be near, whose nervous system communicates safety rather than threat, whose attention communicates genuine interest rather than evaluation, whose energy communicates abundance rather than need. This is not subtle influence in the sense of being hidden or manipulative. It's subtle in the sense of operating below explicit language, below deliberate behavior, in the layer of communication that humans have been reading each other through for hundreds of thousands of years. You cannot fake your way into this layer, but you can grow into it. And when you do, the influence it creates is not coercive. It's gravitational. People move toward it the way all things move toward what nourishes them, without knowing why, without needing to. Chapter 10. Connection without neediness. Need is the world's most effective repellent. It works on everyone, every time, without exception. Not because people are cold, not because wanting connection is wrong. Need is a repellent because of what it communicates to the nervous systems of the people who encounter it. It communicates scarcity. It communicates that the person approaching you does not have enough internal resources to be okay, and that they are, consciously or not, looking to you to provide what they're missing. This creates pressure. Immediate, palpable, often unspoken pressure. And people respond to pressure the way all living things respond to it. They create distance. The worst part about this mechanism is that it's invisible to the person generating it. People who approach relationships from a place of need are almost never aware that's what they're doing. They think they're being warm, enthusiastic, genuinely interested. And underneath the warmth and the enthusiasm and the questions they are. But the need is also there, running underneath all of it, and it's louder than they think. The psychology of neediness is rooted in attachment theory. The research initiated by John Bowlby and extended by decades of subsequent work into how early relational experiences shape adult patterns of connection and security. The core finding is that people develop internal working models of relationship, unconscious templates for how connection works, whether it's safe and what you have to do to maintain it, based primarily on their earliest experiences with caregivers. These templates are not destiny, but they are persistent, and they operate below the level of conscious intention, which means knowing about them intellectually doesn't automatically change them. Anxious attachment, the pattern most closely associated with relational neediness, develops when early experiences of connection were inconsistent. Sometimes warm and responsive, sometimes cold or absent. The child learns that connection is available but unreliable, which produces a chronic strategy of increased monitoring and increased effort. Pay more attention. Signal more urgently. Work harder to secure the bond that might disappear. This strategy, adaptive in its original context, carries forward into adult relationships where it's not adaptive at all. The increased monitoring reads as surveillance. The increased effort reads as pressure. The urgency reads as desperation. And the people on the receiving end of it, even when they like you, even when they're interested, feel something constrict. The antidote is not indifference. It's not emotional unavailability performed as confidence. These are common misreadings of what secure attachment actually looks like, and they produce their own distinct kind of damage. The antidote is genuine internal security. The actual felt sense that you are okay, not despite being alone or uncertain or not yet having what you want, but in the presence of all of those things. That your worth is not conditional on whether this particular connection works out. That your life is already real and meaningful and livable before this person confirms it. This security is built, as most things worth having are built, through internal development rather than external acquisition. It requires developing what psychologists call emotional independence. Not the independence that refuses to need others, but the independence that doesn't require others to feel fundamentally okay. The distinction is crucial. Healthy interdependence. The ability to genuinely need and be needed in appropriate proportion is one of the foundations of meaningful connection. The goal is not to become someone who needs nothing. It's to become someone whose needs are proportional, flexible, and not deployed as emergencies in the direction of people who didn't sign up to manage them. Building emotional independence means developing internal resources for the things you've been looking for externally. Self-soothing. The capacity to regulate your own emotional state without requiring someone else to do it for you. This is not suppression. It's the ability to sit with difficult feeling, to process it, to move through it without needing to immediately externalize it into someone else's lap. Self-validation. The capacity to assess your own worth, your own decisions, your own experience without requiring constant external confirmation. Not arrogance. The simple ability to hold your own perspective as real without needing unanimous agreement. Self-generated meaning. A life that feels sufficiently full and purposeful on its own terms, not contingent on any particular relationship completing it. This is perhaps the most important one and the most undervalued. A person with a genuinely meaningful life, work they care about, interests that engage them, relationships of various kinds that sustain them, approaches new connection from abundance. There is already enough. This might be more. It doesn't have to be. From this place, something shifts in how you show up in relationships. You stop being primarily focused on what you can get from interactions and start being genuinely interested in what's actually there. The desperate quality disappears. The monitoring relaxes. The pressure lifts. And in the space where the pressure was, something else becomes possible. Actual curiosity. Actual generosity. Actual presence. The qualities that create genuine connection, rather than performing the desire for it. The related concept here is differentiation, the psychological capacity to remain yourself while in close relationship with others. Many people, particularly those with anxious attachment patterns, lose themselves in relationships. They adopt the other person's opinions, suppress their own preferences, abandon their interests, contract their personality in the direction of whatever seems most likely to secure the connection. This is always counterproductive. Not morally, it's understandable, even touching in its desperation to belong. But practically, because the thing that was interesting about you, your specific perspective, your distinctive way of being in the world, your actual personality, that's what created attraction in the first place. Contracting it to preserve the connection dissolves the very thing the connection was based on. Maintaining differentiation means staying genuinely yourself even when closeness is new and therefore feels fragile. Disagreeing when you actually disagree. Pursuing your own interests alongside shared ones. Maintaining your own social world. Having opinions that don't automatically align with the other person's. This is not distance. It is the presence of two actual people rather than one person and their mirror. And two actual people with genuine distinctiveness and real points of friction and honest perspectives have something to actually connect over, whereas a mirror has nothing to offer except reflection, which is flattering briefly and empty quickly. Vulnerability is the last element worth addressing here, and it requires careful handling because it's genuinely misunderstood in most of the places it's discussed. Vulnerability is not disclosure. It's not the strategic sharing of personal information as a bonding technique. It's not emotional dumping. It's not performing openness. Genuine vulnerability is the willingness to be actually seen, to share something real about your inner experience in a way that doesn't require a specific response, doesn't demand reciprocation, and isn't managed for effect. It's the difference between telling someone something true about yourself because you trust the moment and telling them something personal because you're hoping it will accelerate their feelings. The first creates connection. The second creates pressure, even when it looks like openness. Healthy vulnerability is calibrated. It's appropriate to the level of trust that actually exists, not the level you're hoping to create by leaping ahead of it. It's offered without agenda, without expectation, without the implicit request that the other person now owes you matching disclosure or emotional management. When genuine vulnerability meets genuine curiosity, something happens that no technique produces. Two people actually meeting each other, not the versions they've constructed for public consumption. Each other, with all the strangeness and imperfection and unexpected depth that actual people contain. That is connection, the real kind, the kind that makes people feel, in its presence, that they've been living in smaller rooms than they knew were available. And it is available, reliably, repeatably, to anyone who has done enough internal work to approach others without needing them to complete something. Chapter 11. Reading the Room. Group Dynamics and Social Navigation. Every group has a weather system, and most people walk in without checking the forecast. They arrive with their prepared version of themselves, their social persona, their talking points, their habitual energy level. They deploy these regardless of what the room actually needs, what the group is currently experiencing, or what invisible weather has been building before they got there. Then they wonder why it sometimes feels like they're speaking into wind. Group dynamics are not complicated in theory. They're complicated in practice because they're invisible, operating below the level of explicit content in a layer most people never learn to read. Every group, regardless of size or context, has a simultaneous weather report running across several dimensions. The emotional climate, the power distribution, the existing alliances and tensions, the unspoken rules about what's acceptable to say and how to say it. Miss any one of these dimensions, and you're navigating with an incomplete map. Miss all of them, and you're essentially walking blind into terrain that everyone else, consciously or not, has already partially mapped. The foundation of reading group dynamics is what researchers call social situational awareness, the capacity to observe the broader patterns of a group interaction rather than just participating in your corner of it. This requires a specific kind of attention split. Part of you remains engaged in the immediate interaction. Another part steps back to a slight observational distance, watching the room the way a director watches a scene, not in it, but tracking all of it simultaneously. Most people cannot do this because their anxiety consumes the available attention. When you're primarily focused on your own performance, how you're coming across, whether you're fitting in, what to say next, there's no cognitive bandwidth left to observe anything beyond your immediate experience. You're inside the scene with no view of the stage. Regulated nervous system, again, the prerequisite for everything. When the anxiety quiets enough that your attention can move outward, the first thing to assess is emotional climate. What is the overall feeling tone of this group right now? Is the energy high or low? Playful or serious? Is there an underlying tension that isn't being named? Is there excitement about something? Grief about something? Boredom that's been politely concealed? Emotional climate is readable through aggregate nonverbal signals. The collective posture of the group, the pace and volume of conversation, the ratio of laughter to silence, the way people are positioned relative to each other. These signals, taken together, paint a picture that is usually quite accurate. The key insight is that the appropriate contribution to any group moment is a function of the current emotional climate, not a function of what you had planned to say. Walking into a group that's processing something difficult with high energy and entertainment is not charisma. It's a weather mismatch. Walking into a group that's ready to be energized with careful restraint misses an opportunity. Reading the room means reading the actual room, then deciding what the actual room needs, then deciding whether you're the right person to provide it in this moment, or whether the most valuable contribution is stepping back. The power dimension of group dynamics is more complex and considerably more interesting than most people realize. Every group has formal power, the explicit hierarchy of titles, roles, and designated authority. This is usually visible and rarely the most interesting part of the picture. The informal power structure, the actual influence patterns that determine how decisions get made, which ideas gain traction, and whose energy most shapes the group's direction, is where the real dynamics live. Informal power is distributed through several currencies that operate simultaneously. Expertise, who has knowledge that others need. Charisma, who has a quality of presence that others orient toward. Social capital, who knows whom and how those connections extend beyond the room. Emotional intelligence, who can read and navigate the group's feeling states most accurately. And sheer credibility, whose track record gives their contributions automatic weight. The person with the highest formal title and the person with the most actual influence in a room are frequently not the same person. Learning to identify the real centers of gravity in any group, quickly, accurately, without relying on the org chart, is a sophisticated social skill that most people develop slowly, if at all. It requires watching rather than performing. Noticing who others look to when a decision is uncertain. Whose suggestions get implemented while others get politely discussed and dropped. Who can shift the emotional tone of the room with a single comment. Who people move toward during unstructured time. These are the informal power holders. Understanding who they are and how they operate doesn't mean performing for them specifically. That would be its own form of transparent maneuvering. It means understanding the actual terrain so you can navigate it honestly. The alliance and tension dimension is where group dynamics become genuinely complex. Every group of more than a few people contains existing relationships, affinities, frictions, histories, loyalties that predate your presence and will continue after it. These invisible structures shape how your contributions land in ways that have nothing to do with their quality. Something you say that would be received neutrally coming from one person might be received with enthusiasm or resistance coming from you, depending entirely on relational dynamics you're not aware of. Understanding this doesn't mean you can always navigate it perfectly, but it means you stop taking the reactions personally and start reading them as information about the terrain. The most practically useful skill in complex group navigation is what might be called role flexibility. The ability to identify what the group currently needs and shift your contribution accordingly, rather than defaulting to your habitual role regardless of context. Most people have a default group role, the one they unconsciously gravitate toward because it's where they feel most comfortable and competent. The entertainer, the expert, the peacemaker, the challenger, the quiet observer. These roles are not wrong. They're usually genuine expressions of personality. But deployed rigidly, without regard to what the group actually needs in a particular moment, they stop being contributions and start being habits. A group experiencing real tension doesn't need the entertainer's habitual humor. It needs someone willing to name what's happening. A group that's been operating too seriously for too long doesn't need the expert's careful precision. It needs someone willing to lighten the register. The person who can read which role is missing and step into it, genuinely, not performatively, becomes someone groups want around because they reliably make collective experiences better. Tension diffusion deserves its own attention because it's among the rarest and most valuable social skills in group settings. Groups develop tension for many reasons: unresolved disagreements, competing needs, accumulated frustration, simple overextension of energy. And most people's response to group tension is one of two things. They either pretend it isn't there, maintaining the surface performance of everything being fine while the tension continues to build, or they react to it, taking sides, escalating, making the implicit explicit in ways that increase rather than decrease the charge. The person who can diffuse tension skillfully does something different. They acknowledge what's happening without dramatizing it. They find the common ground underneath the disagreement, the shared concern or value that the conflict is actually about, beneath the specific positions. They introduce perspective that makes the immediate friction smaller relative to the larger context. Sometimes they use humor, not to minimize, but to gently release the pressure that's built up. None of this requires authority. It requires emotional regulation, being calm enough to think clearly when others are reactive, and genuine care about the collective experience, which is what distinguishes diffusion from manipulation. Group energy management is the final dimension worth addressing. Groups have rhythms, natural cycles of energy that rise and fall throughout any extended interaction. High energy followed by fatigue, serious focus followed by the need for lightness, deep conversation followed by the need for surface. These rhythms are natural and healthy, and most groups navigate them poorly because nobody is paying enough attention to notice them. The person who notices, who recognizes that the group energy is flagging and gently introduces something that shifts it, or who recognizes that the lightness has gone on long enough and creates space for something more substantive, is providing genuine value that most group members don't even consciously register but immediately feel. This attunement to collective rhythm is one of the most sophisticated forms of social intelligence. It requires sustained observational attention across an entire interaction rather than just your own participation in it. It requires caring more about the quality of the collective experience than about your individual performance within it. That caring, genuine, not performed, is what makes someone a person others want in the room. Not because they're impressive, because the room is better when they're in it. Chapter 12. Handling rejection, criticism, and social setbacks. Rejection feels like a verdict. It's actually just data from one source with limited information. The problem is that knowing this intellectually and experiencing it as true are separated by what feels like an enormous distance. You can understand the psychological explanation, while your nervous system is running its own, considerably older, considerably louder program. The program that evolved when social rejection was a genuine threat to survival, when being cast out of the group meant, with reasonable probability, dying alone. That program has not been updated. It still processes rejection with the same urgency as a physical threat, activating the same neural circuitry, producing the same cascade of stress hormones, generating the same overwhelming imperative to fix it, avoid it, or collapse under the weight of it. This is the evolutionary mismatch at the center of every social setback you've ever experienced. Your ancient nervous system is responding to a modern situation with ancient appropriate intensity. The rejection isn't life-threatening. It doesn't feel that way. Understanding this mismatch doesn't dissolve it, but it creates something valuable. A small but real distance between the feeling and the conclusion. Between this feels devastating and this is devastating. In that distance, choice becomes possible. The first skill in handling rejection well is perspective calibration. The ability to accurately assess what rejection actually means, rather than accepting the meaning your nervous system generates automatically. Rejection is almost never a verdict on your fundamental worth. It is almost always a statement about fit, compatibility, timing, what this particular person needs at this particular moment, what this particular situation required. These are not the same thing, and treating them as the same thing, which most people do reflexively, without examining the equation, produces suffering that significantly exceeds what the situation actually warrants. Someone didn't respond to your message. Your nervous system generates, "You are not interesting enough." The accurate reading is, "They didn't respond to your message." The gap between these two statements contains enormous amounts of unnecessary suffering. Someone gave you feedback you didn't want to hear. Your nervous system generates, "You are fundamentally flawed in the way they've identified." The accurate reading is, one person, with their particular perspective and blind spots and current mood, noticed something worth looking at. These are genuinely different amounts of information. The most attractive people you've encountered handle rejection with a quality that might initially read as indifference, but is actually something more interesting. They take it seriously without taking it personally. They extract the information without accepting the verdict. They feel the sting without building a case against themselves from it. This requires the self-worth foundation we discussed in the confidence chapter. A sense of value that is not primarily contingent on external validation. If your sense of worth is stable, rejection is uncomfortable but not destabilizing. It's weather. Unpleasant weather that passes. If your sense of worth depends heavily on external confirmation, rejection is something closer to structural damage. Each one erodes the foundation a little more, which is why building the internal foundation is not optional for people who want to remain socially engaged without the stakes feeling perpetually catastrophic. The second skill is receiving criticism without becoming defensive, and this one is harder than it sounds because defensiveness is not a choice. It's a reflex, an automatic protective response that activates before conscious evaluation has a chance to run. The defensive response to criticism follows a predictable sequence. The criticism arrives. Something in your system registers it as threat. The threat response activates fight or flight expressed socially as counter-argument, dismissal, or withdrawal. By the time you're consciously processing the feedback, the defensive response has already shaped how you're receiving it. This means that managing your response to criticism requires intervention earlier than most people attempt, before the defensive reflex completes, not after. Which requires, again, the awareness to notice what's happening in your nervous system in real time. The practice is this. When criticism arrives, especially criticism that stings, which is often the criticism that carries the most information, pause before responding. Not dramatically. A breath, a moment of genuine reception rather than immediate evaluation. Let it land before deciding what to do with it. Then ask the question that transforms criticism from threat to resource. Is there anything true in this? Not, is the person right about everything? Not, is this a fair and kindly delivered assessment? Simply, is there anything here worth looking at? Even a small true thing in an otherwise unfair critique is worth finding, because truth is useful regardless of the quality of its delivery vehicle. The people who receive criticism this way, who can hear genuinely difficult feedback and respond with something like "that's worth thinking about" rather than immediate counter-argument, are remarkable to encounter. They make criticism feel safe to offer, which means they receive far more useful information about themselves and their impact than people who defend against it. And they're seen, immediately and unmistakably, as emotionally mature. As people secure enough not to need the protection. This is attractive in the specific way that genuine security is always attractive, because it's real. The third skill is recovering from social mistakes with grace, which means proportionally, without excessive drama in either direction. Social mistakes are universal. Everyone says the wrong thing sometimes, misreads a situation, creates unintended awkwardness, offends someone they were trying to connect with. The mistake itself is rarely the lasting damage. The response to the mistake is where the real impression gets made. Two common failure modes. The first is minimization, pretending the mistake didn't happen, powering through without acknowledgement, hoping everyone will simply move past it. This strategy fails because it communicates that you either didn't notice or didn't care. Neither is an attractive message. The second failure mode is catastrophizing, treating the mistake as significantly larger than it is, over-apologizing, making it the center of attention in a way that makes everyone else responsible for managing your distress about it. This creates a different problem. Now the people around you are uncomfortable not because of the original mistake, but because of the response to it. The graceful middle requires accurate calibration. Acknowledge what happened. Directly, briefly, without excessive self-flagellation. Take appropriate responsibility. If an apology is warranted, offer a real one rather than a performance of one. Then move forward without making the mistake the defining event of the interaction. The ability to do this, to say that came out wrong, let me try that again, or I misread that situation. I apologize and then actually move forward without the mistake trailing behind the rest of the conversation like a weight. Communicate something powerful. That you're secure enough to be imperfect. That your self-worth doesn't depend on flawless execution. that you can handle your own failures without requiring others to manage you through them. Resilience, the capacity to recover and continue after difficulty, is built through exactly the accumulation of experiences this chapter describes. Every rejection survived. Every criticism metabolized into something useful. Every social mistake handled with proportional grace. Each one adds to the evidence base that difficulty is survivable, that you can handle it, that the stakes, while real, are not catastrophic. This accumulated evidence changes something fundamental about how you approach social situations. The ambient dread, the low-grade anticipation of failure that makes many people perform rather than engage, begins to quiet. Not because failure has been eliminated, because its power over you has been reduced by the repeated experience of surviving it. What replaces the dread is something that might initially feel unfamiliar. The actual enjoyment of social interaction, the genuine pleasure of engaging with other people without the interaction, being primarily an exercise in threat management. That's the destination this chapter is pointing toward. Not imperviousness to rejection, not the absence of social pain. The confidence, evidence-based, earned, real, that you can feel the full range of social experience and remain standing at the other end of it, intact, sometimes wiser, always capable of trying again. Chapter 13. Continuous growth as a magnetic force. Stagnant people are boring in a very specific way. They've stopped being surprised by themselves. Everything about them is already known. Their opinions on every topic are predictable from their opinions on adjacent topics. Their responses to new situations are continuous with their responses to old ones. They have reached, somewhere along the line, a settled version of themselves, and decided that this version is the final version. The maintenance phase, the coasting, this is understandable. Growth is uncomfortable. It requires the ongoing willingness to be inadequate at something new, to be the beginner again, to not know, to make the mistakes that come before competence. At some point, many people decide they've earned enough comfort to stop doing that. And in a narrow, short-term sense, they're right. The discomfort does stop. So does the magnetism. Because what people are actually attracted to, underneath the aesthetics, beneath the social skills, below the confidence and the presence, and all the qualities this book has been building toward, is aliveness. The quality of someone who is genuinely still in the process of becoming. Still discovering things about themselves and the world. Still capable of being surprised. Still growing in directions they couldn't have predicted. This aliveness is not the same as restlessness. It's not constant change for its own sake. It's the specific quality of someone engaged in genuine development, who has the next version of themselves somewhere ahead, and is actively, curiously, patiently moving toward it. People are magnetized by this quality for reasons that have both evolutionary and psychological depth. Evolutionarily, the capacity to learn and adapt has always been among the most reliable predictors of long-term survival and success. A person who continues developing is a person who will be more capable next year than they are today, which makes them a more valuable ally, partner, and collaborator over time. Your nervous system reads this signal. So does everyone else's. Psychologically, growing people are simply more interesting. Not because growth makes you inherently more impressive, but because the process of genuine development generates something that static people don't have. Fresh perspective, the ongoing discovery of new capabilities. the humility that comes from regularly being a beginner, the specific confidence that comes from having learned hard things before and knowing you can learn hard things again. These qualities are attractive in the way that all genuine things are attractive, because they're real, because they can't be faked, at least not for long, and because encountering them in another person creates the feeling, however fleeting, that growth is possible, that you too could be further along by next year than you are today. The foundation of sustained growth is intrinsic motivation, the drive to develop that comes from internal satisfaction rather than external reward or validation. This distinction matters enormously because the trajectory of growth differs completely depending on its source. Extrinsically motivated growth, developing to impress, to compete, to secure approval, will reliably plateau the moment the external reward seems secure. Once you've gotten the relationship, the job, the social status that motivated the development, the motivation evaporates. The growth stops. Sometimes reverses, intrinsically motivated growth, developing because the process itself is meaningful, because competence is genuinely satisfying, because curiosity about your own potential is a real and ongoing thing, doesn't plateau in the same way. It self-sustains, because the reward is in the activity itself rather than in what the activity might produce. People who are intrinsically motivated to grow do things that extrinsically motivated people find incomprehensible. They continue learning skills after anyone would have certified them as competent. They pursue interests that have no obvious social payoff. They challenge themselves in ways that create public failure risk that no external reward justifies. They're not performing development, they're actually developing. And the difference, again, is immediately legible to anyone paying attention. Building intrinsic motivation for growth requires connecting your development efforts to something deeper than outcomes, to your values, to your genuine curiosity, to a vision of who you want to be that isn't primarily defined by what others will think of you when you get there. This requires the self-knowledge we discussed in the confidence chapter, knowing yourself well enough to know what actually matters to you, as distinct from what you've been conditioned to want, or what seems like the approved thing to pursue. Genuine intrinsic motivation can only emerge from genuine self-knowledge. Otherwise, you're pursuing someone else's version of growth and wondering why it doesn't sustain. The specific domains of growth that most reliably sustain attractiveness are worth identifying, not as a prescription, but as a map of where the compounding tends to be highest. Emotional intelligence has perhaps the highest return of any developmental investment, because it improves everything else simultaneously. Growing in your capacity to understand and navigate your own emotional life directly enhances your presence, your relationships, your communication, your resilience, and your quality of daily experience. The person you become through consistent emotional development is more attractive in every dimension we've discussed in this book. Physical vitality, not as aesthetic achievement, but as the ongoing maintenance of energy, capability, and embodied confidence. The discipline required to maintain physical health generates qualities that extend far beyond the physical. Consistency, delayed gratification, the specific confidence of someone who makes hard commitments and keeps them. These compound over time in ways that are visible to everyone around you. Intellectual engagement, maintaining genuine curiosity about ideas, maintaining the habit of learning, staying engaged with the world's complexity, rather than retreating into comfortable certainty. Intellectually alive people are genuinely more interesting to talk to. Not because they know more facts, but because their engagement with ideas is active rather than archived. They're still thinking, still updating, still finding things surprising. Creative expression and skill mastery. Having domains where you're developing genuine competence for its own sake. Not for productivity or career advancement or social capital, because making things well, because mastering something difficult, is one of the most reliable sources of genuine satisfaction available to human beings. And genuinely satisfied people are magnetic in ways that people performing satisfaction never are. The practice of regular self-reflection is the mechanism that keeps all of this honest. Without it, it's easy to confuse activity with development, to mistake being busy with growing, to accumulate experiences without integrating them into actual change. Self-reflection means periodically asking genuinely difficult questions. Not, am I doing enough? That's anxiety wearing the mask of self-improvement. But who am I becoming through what I'm doing? What patterns am I repeating that I should examine? What's been working and why? What's the next honest challenge? These questions require enough stillness to actually hear the answers, which is why the people who grow most consistently over time tend to also have some relationship with stillness. Meditation, journaling, extended time in nature. Any practice that creates the quiet in which honest self-assessment becomes possible. The final thing worth saying about continuous growth as a magnetic force is this. It changes your relationship to time in a way that others can sense even when they can't name it. Static people experience time as something that happens to them, carrying them further from their best years, away from when things were possible, toward a future that is more of the same or less than it used to be. This relationship to time generates a quality of subtle resignation that expresses in thousands of small ways. The way someone talks about the future, the degree of genuine excitement they can access about what's coming. Whether they seem to be oriented forward or backward, growing people experience time differently. The future contains things they don't know yet, capabilities they haven't developed, versions of themselves they can't fully picture. This orientation, genuinely forward-facing, genuinely curious about who they're becoming, generates an energy that others find both attractive and quietly inspiring. It reminds people of something they may have forgotten, that they too are still in the process of becoming, that the story is still being written, that next year could be genuinely, substantially different from this one. That reminder, offered not through words, but through the living example of someone who hasn't stopped growing, is one of the most powerful gifts one person can give another. And it costs nothing except the willingness to remain, always, a little uncomfortable, a little stretched, a little further into territory you haven't fully mapped. Exactly where growth lives.